Welcome to the latest Watercolors Aquarium Gallery video brought to you by the Aquarium Rush Studios in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today we're talking about feeding corals.
Aren't corals photosynthetic?
But wait, there's more. It's one of those common things we hear, right? That you don't need to feed corals because they're photosynthetic. Mm-hmm. And that's true, they are, and somewhere between 80 to 90% of their nutrition can come from the symbiotic algae within their tissues. They still have mouths, and they still have mouths for a reason.
And feeding coral is fun.
It's fun, and I would also very heavily argue that I think that especially if you're looking for good coral growth and you want more color out of your corals, you need to feed them.
Absolutely.
A whole balanced diet is always better.
Right.
Especially in the kind of system that really promotes coral color, which is one that doesn't have a lot of those nitrates and phosphates that they will filter out of the water. Supplementing that with food directly to the coral is an easier way that will keep them looking prettier.
Yeah.
It is true that you can successfully keep a reef tank very well with never feeding your corals. They're still getting some food because the tank is naturally producing food. Mm-hmm. But you said it right there, Amy, that if you want your corals to thrive and have color, that's going to be the difference. So what are we feeding them?
The one I'm going to talk about first is Cecums Reef phytoplankton. It's a blend of green and brown phytoplanktons. Who could have guessed? To my knowledge, this one would probably work best for like SPS corals, but I think any reef tank would benefit from this because thanks to the mucus coating of all corals, they're really good at catching like these microalgae. And in a reef environment, algae is everywhere. And
right.
A lot of reef aquariums, our goal is to not have it. And in particular, why this fascinates me is in a reef ecosystem, the particular algae that are in this mix are the base of where a lot of the carotenoids, as in the pigments of a lot of corals and fish come from in their ecosystem. So I'm like, well, if you want more color, well, this is a great way to start. At least in my mind, this is the one that makes the most sense to me.
Right.
Just on a ecosystem level, like my understanding of science.
Yeah. Mushroom corals and soft corals are going to love phytoplanktons as well.
Yeah.
They actually tend to be more herbivorous. Yes, there are herbivorous corals, omnivorous corals, and carnivorous corals. So the herbivorous corals are going to love that phytoplankton.
Getting back to that omnivore, carnivore.
Yeah.
That's cool. I never thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. That is so true. But they are an animal. That shouldn't surprise me.
Right.
It's like, it's always something new with these guys, but it's not. We just keep forgetting they're animals.
Yeah.
Right. Really loosely, and of course there are exceptions, and these distinctions aren't scientific distinctions, they're obvious distinctions, but generally speaking, the LPS corals tend to be more carnivorous. Soft corals tend to be more herbivorous. And the small polyp stonies tend to be more omnivorous.
With their feeding styles, that makes perfect sense. I mean, those giant mouths of some of those LPS, they look like they're waiting for something big to just pass by.
You can feed silver sides to plate corals.
Wow.
So the big mouth on those plate corals. So a plate coral is a single polyp coral, solitary, it's not colonial. Mm-hmm. Some of those things are going to get into the 5 or 6 inch diameter, if not larger, and that mouth can be 1 inch to 1.5 inches long. Nothing has a small mouth to eat small things except whales.
Sorry, I just had to process that all though because I didn't know any of that about plate coral. That is so cool.
That is so
cool. They engulf it. They can stretch that mouth and just completely engulf larger pieces of food.
So something that would eat larger pieces of food, I would expect might be a good candidate for the reef zooplankton, which is larger generally in the wild.
It is going to be slightly larger, but any of them, particularly if they have a stony skeleton, are going to want zooplankton.
Okay.
Yeah. I think this one in particular would benefit from, turkey basters or like targeting at your corals. Okay. Just because it is larger.
Are the particles in the bottle actually larger, or is it still just kind of a blend?
It's kind of a blend.
So this is 1 to 20.
Yep, micrometers, and this is 12.5 to 500 micrometers.
Okay. So it is like actually bigger. I've never used this, so I don't know anything about it.
It's newer to me, but I'm kind of impressed with it.
Neat. Cool. Well, on the other hand, we also have Classics.
Classics. Coral Frenzy and Reefroids from Polybiomarine. I get asked the question all the time, which one's better? And I have no idea. I've used them both. I like them both. What I usually suggest is switch back and forth. This is going to be a little larger food particle, and what both of these companies have done is put all kinds of things in their food additives that taste good, right? So the way to feed this stuff is to dissolve a very small amount, and a little goes a long way. Dissolve a very small amount in a little bit of tank water, salt water, not RO water, not fresh water, but in your tank water. We're talking like 1/8 of a teaspoon in about a cup of water, and that's how much you're gonna feed. Then take your spoon that you scooped with and rinse that in your tank. That little teeny little bit that's left on that spoon is gonna put that taste in the water. And on some of those LPS squirrels, you'll see those snaky feeding tentacles.
So fast.
It's really cool to watch. They'll actually learn to open those feeding tentacles as soon as that food taste gets in the water. Now remember, most of these corals are going to be feeding at night because that's when there's usually more plankton in the water. At night, when you look at your aquarium, the feeding tentacles are going to be up all over the place, right? So we have to sort of train your corals to come out during the day. And then I am a target feeder. I am not a broadcast feeder. Lots of people just say squirt a bunch of this into the tank and let it drift around. I really like target feeding better.
It's just more fun, at least for me anyways.
Yeah.
Because it's like you get to watch your polyps attacking whatever you're giving it.
Right, right.
And then you know that it's getting it, and you know you're not putting in more than you need that's just gonna get sucked up in your filtration or just rest in your system, which you really don't want.
Right. Now what we don't have out here is some of the bigger frozen foods like mysis shrimp and yes, krill and silver sides for some of those larger corals. Mysis shrimp with any of the euphyllias and many of the brain corals, the trachyphyllias, fabias, phavites, a lot of those corals, they can eat things as big as mysis shrimp, and they will. So put that taste in there, squirt some mysis in there, and watch the corals just engulf pieces of mysis shrimp. It's almost like they look bigger the next day when you feed them something.
Oh yeah. Like, if you can imagine what a happy coral looks like.
I think they smile.
I like to imagine that. They do have mouths.
Yeah, exactly.
So then I would throw a few questions at you.
Yeah.
Just because I know I get these questions a lot.
Yes.
Do you have a preference for the liquid versus the dry?
They all do different things. Phytoplankton is going to go into a tank, and that's going to feed all kinds of different things in the tank, not just the corals. Some of the sea stars, all kinds of filter feeders, sponges in your tank are just going to love that stuff. And those sponges are then going to also reproduce and put spores in the tank that are going to feed corals. Something like the zooplankton is going to have kind of a similar effect. So that's really going to just increase the overall population of pods and sponges and other filter feeding things, and then provide some nutrition to your corals. These products and feeding mysis shrimp and things like that are going to be if you want to specifically target specific corals with specific foods. And I specifically said specific a lot. So that's going to be more what these are going to be focused on. So yeah, different things for different purposes.
So you mean to tell me that corals are a diverse group of organisms that have different requirements? Yeah.
Yeah.
These products allow you to artificially come closer to that without, culturing all this plankton on your own.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you dive on an actual coral reef and you go spend some time looking under crevices and in caves, how many different filter feeding organisms there are down there.
Wow.
And then to recognize that every single one of those organisms filters plankton out.
Right.
Right? And there are these huge populations of these organisms under those ledges. They're not getting any nutrition from the sun. Then start to think about just how much food is being produced on that reef.
Yeah.
That's what you're emulating.
And there's enough somehow for everybody, and we can barely see any of it, let alone most.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So this gets us a step closer to replicating that.
Exactly.
I don't think you necessarily need all of them. Like,
Right.
I would probably recommend building your collection of reef foods and using them in a rotational, something like that. You don't need to buy them all at once.
And still use it carefully, recognizing that you are adding nutrients to your system. Your filtration and your aquarium maintenance needs to be up to the extra nutrients that you're putting into the system. You can overfeed corals just like you can overfeed fish.
Yeah. Feeding some is better than feeding none. Feeding too much is worse than feeding none.
Right.
Feeding a huge variety is better than feeding nothing, but feeding one of these is also better than feeding nothing.
That's
Yeah.
specifically a lot of betters.
So, yeah,
I'm
start
picturing,
somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone's like taking notes and trying to like compare them.
Doing the algebra there.
Well, look for our podcast coming up where we're going to go into talking about specific foods for specific corals and what that food is going to do for that coral more on an individual basis.
Yeah, if you're a reef keeper, let us know. We definitely have been focusing a little bit more on freshwater and planted aquariums lately because we haven't heard from you. So please leave a comment below and we'll make more videos like this.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like, I'm targeting you guys. Specifically tell me what videos you want, and I can help you out there.
There we go. I like it.
And don't forget to subscribe if you actually do want to see more.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much for watching. Have lots of fun and keep those hands wet.